Hello everyone, thanks for joining in. In the last video, we covered the theoretical part of ISS protocol, but today we will cover these four topics. First one, difference between ISIS and OSPF. Second, LSA types in ISIS. Third, NET address format in ISIS. And last, single area ISIS configuration. So let's start with the first topic, that is the difference between ISIS and OSPF. So ISIS is a link state protocol like OSPF. So it uses the same concept of full view of network by exchanging the LSAs. So we divide the complete network in a logical group. That logical group is called area. So in OSPF, in a single area, we use two types of LSA, LSA1 and LSA2. Similarly, in ISIS as well, we uses two types of LSA, that is level 1 LSA and level 2 LSA. So level 1 LSA we use for complete information details, and level 2 LSA we use to share nest of information. Okay, so suppose if we want to exchange the routes between two area 1 and area 0 in OSPF, so we use LSA3, and we use a special type of routers, that is AVR routers. So as we know that AVR router is a part of two area, right? But in ISIS, if we want to exchange the routes from one area to another, so we use only a level 2 LSA. So in ISIS only we have two types of LSA. And one more thing, in ISIS there is no such routers that is a part of the two areas or three areas. One single router can be the part of only one area. Okay, now in OSPF, to exchange the external routes we use LSA4, LSA5 and LSA7. But in ISIS we use only level 2 LSA to exchange the external routes as well. Okay, now let's move on our LSA types. That is already discussed that we have only two types of LSA in ISIS, that is level 1 LSA and level 2 LSA. And one more thing, in ISIS, in a intra area, each router by default prepare the two database, that is level 1 database and level 2 database, so that I will show you during the practical part. And now let's move on the third part, that is NET address format. So in OSPF, we use router ID for unique identifier for the router, right? And we advertise our interface via network command. But in ISIS, there is one address that is called net address. So in that, we will put area ID, system ID, and last device type. There is no such difference command like router ID and area ID like that. Okay, and in ISIS we represent area ID with 49 dot this number, that is a 2 hexadecimal character. Okay, so 49 represents here private identifier for ISIS, and 0012 is a number will be in hexadecimal. So complete these two number, 49 dot and 2 hexadecimal digit, that represents our area ID. So in the net address, we will start with area ID. After that, we'll have to put 12 hexadecimal digit as a system ID. So this system ID will be act as our router ID of the node. After that, we will put here 00, that will represent our intermediate system. So in the last video, we already discussed that in ISIS, we covered two types of node. First one is intermediate system, that represents our router, and second one is end system, that represents our laptop or computer. Okay, so let's move on our practical part. So for today, this will be our simple topology, router 1 and router 2. So these two routers is in area 49.0001. Okay, and one thing we need to keep in mind, that there is no area zero concept in ISIS. Like in OSPF, suppose any area routers want to communicate to different area routers, then we need to bypass backbone area, that is our area zero. But in ISIS, any area can communicate to any other area. Okay, so here we are taking net address for router 1 as 49.0001 as a area ID. After that, we will use 12 hexadecimal digit, that is system ID, that we represent our router ID. So we are keeping it simple here. So we will put here 11 character as 0 and last one is 1, that will represent our router 1, and then after that 00, that will represents our intermediate system. And in router 2 we are using the same thing, but we will change here system ID, the last character with 2, right? And we are using the subnet 12.1.1.1/24 for router 1 and 12.1.1.2/24 for router 2. So let's take the console of router 1 and router 2. So let me show you the IP address what we have configured here. So 12.1.1.1 on router 1 interface G1 by 0, we have created a loopback 1.1.1.1, and for loopback 1 we have created 10.10.10.10 IP address. Let's see for router 2. So I think we did a mistake. Let me change the IP address for G1 by 0. Okay, we configured by mistake 12.1.1.1 at both places. IP address 12.1.1.2 255.255.255.0. No shutdown. And we are using here two loopbacks, loopback 0 and loopback 1. Okay, so let's configure the ISIS. So we will start to enable the ISIS process. So the command will be router ISIS. Then after that we'll have to configure here NET address. The command will be net. Then we will do here question mark. So we can see that here it's asking me to configure the network entity title. So the command will be 49.0. Sorry, 0001. That will be our area ID. Then our system ID, that will be at 12 hex characters. So 0000.0000.0001, and last intermediate system device type. So that will be 00. Okay, so it's configured. So as I discussed that in OSPF we were using a network command to advertise the interfaces, but here in ISIS there is no such things. So we'll have to go inside the interface and we will call ISIS here. So the command will be IP router ISIS. Similarly for loopback 0 and loopback 1. Okay, the configuration of router 1 is done. Now we will move to router 2. We will configure first the router ISIS. Then we will configure the net address. So command will be net space 49.0001. That will be our area ID. Then we will configure here system ID, that will represents our router ID. So command will be 0000.0000.0002. That will represents router 2, and last device type, that is 00 for intermediate system. Okay. Now we will call interface inside the ISIS. So interface G1 by 0. Command will be IP router ISIS. Interface loopback 0. IP router ISIS. Interface loopback 1. IP router ISIS. So we have called both the interfaces inside ISIS. So let's check the command output. So the command is show ISIS neighbors to check the neighbor. So here we can see that router 1 has neighbor R2. Okay, so as I said before that each router prepare two database, L1 database and L2 database both. But in intra area by default L1 is preferred over L2. So we can see in output in routing table. Okay, let me see. So IP route ISS, that will be better. So here we can see that only L1 routes is preferred over L2. Okay, so as we know that the AD value of ISIS is 115. Okay, so we have one more term. Let me run the command. So ISIS neighbor. So we can see that here we have one more term, that is circuit ID, that represents DR in OSPF. But in ISIS we use the term DIS, that's full form is designated intermediate system. So we can make router 1 as a DIR by changing the priority of the interface. But if we have the same priority, then the system ID of the router is higher, that will become the DIS. So as we know that the system ID of router 2 is 2 here, that is more than 1. So that's why our router 2 is DIS here. Okay. So we can see the database here as well. The command will be so ISIS database detail. So here we can see that we have two types of databases, that is level 1 link state database and level 2 link state database. So in level 1 database, we can see that all the links that is connected to router 1, that is 12.1.1.0, 1.1.1.1, 10.10.10.10. And here that is router 2, that is our DIS. And for router 2, we can see that the three links, that is 12.1.1.1, 2.2.2.2 and 20.20.20.20, and here R2 as a DIS. And in level 2 link state database, so here we can see that router 1 is connected to these links. So 1111, 12 and 10 is all three links of router 1, and 2.2.2.2 and 20 of router 2. So suppose router 2 is connected to router 3 and router 3 is in different area. So we will use their level 2 database, right? So that was the agenda for today, guys. I hope you have learned something new. So till the next video, I am signing off. Take care.